Same conversation that I got into with this guy standing there at the counter. And they were talking about whether or not Star Wars is going to, how much money it's going to make. And people say they don't care about it, but you do care about it. Just from a standpoint of, if it makes a lot of box office numbers, then it just makes it even more special. I know that sounds silly, and people try to downplay that, but you want it to be successful, and you want it to win. We all want to be on a winning team, and our fandom is no different than that. I attribute it, for as bizarre of an example as it is, but I attribute that to, or compare it to, if I will, probably a better word. I compare it to, being a fan of a race car driver. You want that race car driver to win. You want this thing you love to be successful. But they were talking about the most, the biggest box office films of all time, and one of them being Avatar. And it was just on TV. I was having lunch and watching the football game for a minute, and then I flipped over during a break, and Avatar was on, so I clicked it on because Kyle was there next to me, and the movie was on. It wasn't that commercial, so we turned it on for a minute, and I was reminded of the fact that movie is one of the biggest. I think it isn't. That's the record holder, right? It's either Avatar or Titanic as the number one slot, but Avatar doesn't have any cultural bearing whatsoever. Avatar did not seep into our psyche the way the Star Wars does. Now, that's not to say that Star Wars is going to make more money. It is to say that it's tough to know how these movies are going to do. Star Wars is still a sequel. Avatar was an event film, and the technology used and the innovation and the leaps and bounds that Avatar was successful at in its 3D and how it was filmed ended up making it the most popular movie. It was an event, but it didn't end up grabbing the imagination of the public. You don't really see people when you go to conventions dressed up like Na'vi. You don't see people carrying on about the mythology of Pandora. It's just it doesn't have that kind of cultural weight. It was a good, fun movie. It was an event film that everybody went to see, and you wanted to see it more just because it was visually just like eye candy and so stunning. But it didn't end up seeping into our culture the way that Star Wars does. And again, that's not to say that because Star Wars is able to grab our imaginations the way that it does, and has, a much deeper fandom than an Avatar does, it's going to make more money. It is to say that it's going to have more impact, certainly, regardless of the box office numbers, right? It was just cool. It was a cool thing to be there and just have another little experience with somebody. And actually didn't end there. On the checkout, on the way out, the woman at the register was like, "Did you go?" She saw my shirt and she goes, "Oh, did you go over and get any Star Wars stuff?" And then we got into this, conversation about it too. And this was an older woman as well. So this brings me to an article from our local liberal rag here in Southern Arizona. Sorry, my conservative person of my talk show is coming out. I got an article here. Sarah Garrett Gasson, who usually I give a hard time when they write editorials. And I'm going to give a little bit of a hard time in this one, but not for my normal left versus right issues. But she's written an editorial in the Arizona Daily Star this week titled, "The Force is Strong." I wanted to share with you a couple of points out of this. The request from my dear friend was straightforward. Can you be in charge of Star Wars? Her 6-year-old son isn't ready to see the movies, but kids in his class are talking about it. Everybody's talking about it because of the new movie. Classmates were speaking a different language and told him that they were talking Ewok, and he didn't know what that was. Why are they called Ewoks? What are droids? She's only seen the original movie, and that was a long time ago. So, Star Wars is a big deal. There's a lot of questions that she can't answer, right? And this is the mother to the 6-year-old son. So she reached out to her friend who writes for this newspaper to help her out. Now they go on to say that they grew up in a home without a television, but remembers the common language of Star Wars that was provided on the playground and beyond. We saw it when it came out in 77. My backyard was the site of countless battles with our wiffle bat or wrapping paper tube lightsabers, which really only lasted like for 2 or 3 swings, right? Until they all started to unravel. Usually the cardboard tube lightsabers, you decided who won based off of whose ended up remaining intact the longest, right? So she goes on to say, so yes, I will be in charge of Star Wars. He will know that there are really only 3 Star Wars movies, she writes. The 3 prequels are computer-generated literalism. They have none of the humanity of the original movies, a hero's search played out in a story among the stars. Man, hate's a strong word. It bugs me, that myopic view of the prequels. And anybody who really knows their Star Wars knows that there were more. What did somebody break down? There were actually more practical models, I think, in the Phantom Menace than there was in A New Hope, or something to this effect. You can go back to every single one of those 6 movies and see green screen, and every single one of them, and the new ones. You can do all 7, and you can see green screen. So it really is just a stereotype. Now, granted, there were cringe moments, and I've mentioned this before, and especially in Revenge of the Sith, where it just went too far. There were still plenty of models that were done, but it wasn't a matter of not enough models being done. It was a matter of using the CGI in places where it didn't need to be. If George had just stuck to when he needed to use CGI and not made every single clone trooper CGI or done entire sets as CGI, then it would have been different. Anyway, back to this woman's article. So then came the questions. Where does Darth Vader live? Why is the Death Star so easy to sneak onto? What does R2-D2 tell the Death Star when he connects to it? How does the Millennium Falcon fly? Why do you need 2 people to fly it? The questions go on and on. So she goes on to say, we spent an hour and a half at lunch with nonstop questions. I didn't make things up, but these were details I'd never really thought about before. I guess the Empire parks its vehicles on the Death Star. Where else would they park them? At one point, I described R2-D2 turning off the tractor beam on the Death Star as him being like the IT guy who fixes computers in an office. He didn't turn off the tractor beam. Obi-Wan did. See, people like her should not be answering the questions of little children because she's going to feed them false information about the galaxy far, far away. Such curiosity, she writes, is inspiring. I may not know all the answers to his questions or the right answers. I added that part. But I do know this. The Force is strong with this one. Now, look, much like her her other editorials that I've been covering for 8 years being here in Tucson, there wasn't much of a point to that, except to say the point was a lot like the point that I made at the beginning of the show, and that is, as she writes at the very end, Star Wars is everywhere right now. I actually find myself I say difficult on a relative scale, so don't misunderstand. Okay, I actually I find myself in a difficult place because I'm such a Star Wars fan, and my news talk show, Monday through Friday, I keep a very sort of entertaining, or I try to keep the entertainment value high. I consider myself more of an entertainer than I do a commentator or pundit, for crying out loud, because I don't consider myself that at all. I'm sure some people would disagree, but that's just me. But movies are a big fabric of my show, and I compare real world situations to movies all the time. And anybody who listens to my show knows that I'm a Star Wars fan. My Facebook page, if I don't go and keep up with it, ends up looking like a catalog for Star Wars merchandise and memes. Because so many people, when they find something posted on my timeline, which I find very endearing, I get a kick out of that. It's cool that on the one hand, it's cool that I'm known for that. On the other hand, it's kind of a curse because then I go, you do know that I'm still a talk show host and I talk about other things, right? But I find myself in a tough spot because I am such a Star Wars fan, and now more than ever do I have actually a legitimate excuse to talk about Star Wars on my show, and I find myself, in a place where I'm not 100% sure that I want to, because I don't want to push it too far, because I've always held myself back from talking about Star Wars on the show. Because I had a buddy of mine was like, "Are you talking about Star Wars on the show?" I said, "No, not really." He's like, "Why aren't you? You could do it now. Why don't you?" And I said, "Because I guess I'm trying not to be that guy." This I actually might share on my show because it's pretty cool. This comes from the website 1138. So how much of The Force Awakens have we really seen already? And the way that they break this down is pretty cool. He's thorough. And again, if you want to tweet anything throughout the show, at Jon, Jon, at Jon Justice on Twitter. So remember when the theatrical trailer for The Force Awakens came out, JJ said there wouldn't be any more. That was, almost a couple of months now. And it seems like every other day there's either an international trailer. We only got one. I got to correct him on a few things here. A new TV spot, that's true. Or even an actual clip of the movie coming out. And as far as I'm concerned, there's only been just the one clip that we highlighted on the show last week, right?
We can't outrun them!
We might! In that quad jumper!
Hey, we need a pilot!
We've got one!
You!
Now, going solely by the videos on the official Star Wars YouTube account, there are, at the time of this article, there were, what were we at, 8? No. Well, he says 4. I tried to count to add to the list here, but I've even lost count. But they're going off of the official Star Wars YouTube account, distinct TV spots so far. Ignoring several others. Some are pretty new and perhaps just haven't been added to the account yet. And others are especially short and not very distinct from other ones. There was one spot that was exactly the same, except when the Millennium Falcon flipped, instead of BB-8 kind of getting thrown around, he throws out the cables and attaches himself to the walls of the Millennium Falcon. So all told, it's hard to be sure exactly how many different spots are out there. It feels like we see a lot, and indeed, too much, according to many people. But how much distinct footage have we seen already? With a little more than 3 weeks until the film's release, they decided to go and find out. Now, he puts in a couple of caveats here. He's not a statistician. His number-crunching abilities are those of an amateur at best. So as they've done in the past, they put forward some caveats. They made an effort to include as much as they thought was worth the trouble. And it's very possible they left something out. So this is very, you're going to have to just accept the numbers here, and they're either plus or minus a bit. A lot like a poll, right? Now, he said he was pretty unspoiled about the movie outside of the footage that he's watched, and so he had to make a few educated guesses about where certain shots were located, whether or not paired shots were actually together in the movie. Scattered throughout the article, there were some interesting variations. There was 2 different takes on Finn removing his bloody helmet. There were a couple different takes on X-Wing fighters flying over the water on Takodana, and he kind of jumps to the conclusion that those are different multiple takes that may be showing, the same shot. And so he tries to take that into his calculations. Ultimately, he says the various degrees of his video editing software, the frame rates, the video formats, these are not exact figures, but the best impression that he can get. Now, this article is riddled with a bunch of different diagrams and stuff, which I'm not going to go into detail on. I just highlighted sort of the key points. So, the times are the total amount of actual footage. Okay. He went and converted the running times into a total number of frames as well. So the first new teasers were entirely new. There was the 15-second Instagram teaser, which was completely new except for the reuse of Kylo igniting his lightsaber from the original teaser. So that had 87.5% of new footage. The theatrical trailer kicked that up to 94.4% of new footage. But since then, the only release to be composed of more than 60% new material, unsurprisingly, is the 15-second clip from a couple of days ago. Okay? The TV spots are kind of a crapshoot. He made the point of including everyone that he was aware of at the time of writing this article. Okay. And again, going off of, let's see here, he says, I knew that only about